Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 78 of the Dads and Ed podcast. Excited to be here. We close out 2017 with a phenomenal guest. Gentlemen, we've said it's season 5. We just passed the year 4 anniversary. I was looking back in the archives. November 2013 was our first podcast. So all you young whippersnappers, step up your game. You got a few years to catch up. And my name is Josh Allen, Tech Integration Specialist from Lewis Central. 4 wonderful kids, beautiful wife who's not home. I am single dadding it and hosting a podcast at the same time. We'll see how this goes. Fresh off his podcast tour of the Engage Your School podcast and Edgy EDU, Brent Catlett. Brent, welcome back. It's good to meet you again.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Last time I may or may not have allegedly neglected to remember we were hosting the family over for dinner the evening of Dad and Ed. And so as you can probably imagine, that went a little later than I'd hoped. And then by the time I even got to a point of remembering oh yeah, there's the podcast, it was a little too late. And needless to say, I was unable to make it last time, but I listened in on one of my recent drives. So I appreciate your guys' genuine concern for my whereabouts. But it's all good. It's how it goes. You guys know how it goes. So Brent Catlett here from Kansas City metro area. Looking forward to a great conversation with Kristin, and always fun to be with you guys, and just looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I was glad to see you back tonight. I was a little concerned, and we did put out kind of the all points bulletin last time. If anybody happened to see you out and about, that they were to pick you up and get you back to where you needed to be. So glad you made it home and all is well. My name's Devin Schoening. I work for the wonderful Council Bluffs Community School District in Council Bluffs, Iowa. My 2 great daughters, Grace and Claire, are 13 and 11 in middle school, and my wife Erin, who does all the heavy lifting around the house, does all the really important stuff so that I can be off in a room doing whatever it is we do every couple of weeks.
Yes, that's kind of the way things goes. Well, Brent, as you now know, we had Claire fill in for you, and she did a very good job. But we are glad to have you back. So,
yes, absolutely.
If you want to get in touch with this podcast, what happens to be in the top 3 podcasts listened to by Mickey Mueller. And that's a real stat, by the way, not one that I conjure up just to make it sound good. That's legit. I mentioned last time 12 Days Twitter, which has been just blowing up. It's fabulous. And that one of the task is to share a favorite podcast or book or I think link, and we were in Mickey's top 3 with some great company. So another reason why you should tell your friends about us. You can tweet at us at Dads and Ed. Use the hashtag Dads and Ed at any time. You can subscribe in iTunes or Google Play. Just do a search for Dads and Ed. You can always watch the episode if you'd like on dadsanded.com. And Education Podcast Network. Make sure to check out all the great podcasts that are going on over there. Our buddy Chris Nessie just tweeted out, I don't know if you saw this, December 17th is going to be episode 100 for Chris. So congrats to the boss man for hitting triple digits. I don't know when we're going to get there, probably next year sometime, but good for him for leading the charge and getting stuff out there. So,
did you say, Josh, November of 2013 was when we started?
Yeah. If you go to here's how I do it. If you go to dadsanded.podbean.com, which is where everything's hosted, it's got it all categorized by month. So, November 2013. So
that's awesome.
All right. So one of the things we want to talk about today, which is similar to what we've talked about in the past, but today Devin and I were joined by Taylor Siebert of Strive.tv or Strive TV fame. He started that 7 or 8 years ago as a company helping schools do live broadcasting in the Midwest, primarily in Nebraska. In the last 12 months, he has kind of branched off and joined with another company, still doing Strive, which is going strong, but to do a company called Class Intercom, which we've mentioned on the show before. Class Intercom allows students to create content. They upload it into Class Intercom, and then whoever you designate as an approver clicks OK, and it goes out to your district social media. We at Lewis Central have subscribed to it since the summer. We would like our journalism and yearbook staff to essentially put their leftovers on social media, because as the teacher said today, we take 1,000 pictures and we print 20 of them, either in our newsletter or in our magazine or in our yearbook. So what are we doing with the other 980 pictures? Could we find a spot for them? We actually also now have started, we have an internships class where students can go out and find internships, and we now have a social media one. So we have a fabulous senior who is excuse me, doing that for this trimester. But the discussion that we had today was our journalism teacher is new this year. She has a little bit different philosophy than the one that retired at the end of last year. This year, Maddie Seek is really into wanting kids to create content that is shared on social media and sharing what we already do on social media. And one of the things that we found is that we're struggling with getting kids to buy into that mindset, which I think a lot of times you think would be pretty easy. But kids have done something for a long period of time and have seen things done a certain way. And they're really maybe struggling a little bit with, number one, changing their mindset, but number two, like really understanding that we've changed ours. Like, we want you to start posting out there. So we just had a phenomenal discussion today about how do we get kids to that point. So I guess I'll, Devin, you want to chime in since you were there today too?
Yeah. I think the conversation really was interesting. And I think Taylor mentioned it, I think as we were walking to a classroom today, just this idea about, it's hard to get that change to happen.
Uh-oh, we lost Devin, and Josh is on mute, so I'll pick it up.
Okay, Devin, finish your thought
He's
again.
back.
When kids have kind of learned how to play that game of school, and it's hard to break out of that. So, that's one of the things that kind of kept rattling through my brain today as we were chatting and talking to the kids and hearing them, is it really is hard to get them to think differently about what school can look like, let alone what that individual class, how it can look different and how they can utilize new tools. I know I heard you say today, Josh, to that class of kids that I was there with, you have all the tools you need and nobody's telling you no. Nobody's telling you can't do this. And even for them to think a little differently was really difficult.
Yeah. And Brent, I know I was joking that you were doing this podcast too, but you were talking about schools. Talk a little bit about, what you've been discussing and, your thoughts on kids with that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to hear, having spoken to Taylor recently on his podcast with Class Intercom. I know where he sits and some of his passions and motivation to help kids and get their voice out there. So it's interesting to think about some of the things you guys are saying there in the realm of, and I love the term, I use it as well, game of school, and I don't want my kids to play it, but I wonder if, say, the kids you all were talking to and working with today, are they so conditioned by the game of school that now, as we're trying to allow some ownership, it's not, it's so foreign almost that they don't see it, you know what I mean? Or that's a challenge for them, because for so long it's just been about regurgitating facts on tests and putting them into boxes, and so I don't know, it's interesting.
But see, I think that's kind of the interesting thing about this class, though. You take something like a journalism class or a yearbook class, newspaper, those kinds of things. They aren't traditional classes, I mean, I taught that when I was in the classroom. it's not sit, take the test, you know, do the next assignment, sit, take the test. I mean, it really is, as you know, I've always said, I think that the journalism classes are one of those handful of classes that really are pretty authentic. I mean, you're gonna find what you're good at typically in these classes, and you're gonna get to go with it. So it's not even so much that this class has conditioned them for that. It's really more about that school maybe in general has conditioned them for that. But then the other part of it, that especially with these kinds of classes where they're telling stories, that I think I even tweeted out while we were in the classroom today, is this idea that, you know, Taylor was there talking to them about how to better distribute their product. How do they get their product to an intended audience, and using social media to do that? And you know what I started thinking about is like, I can't think of a class that I've been in or that I've heard of that's, you know, especially like a journalism class where they're telling stories, that's teaching kids how to create engaging content and to tell stories in social media spaces, teaching them to do that in the same way that we teach them to write a story for a magazine. And while they may not be exactly the same, like, I don't think we're teaching that, but then we're in there kind of pushing this class like, hey, you should be sharing more. And I'm not sure they know how to do that necessarily.
Yeah, we had a long discussion over lunch about that, you know, and it was interesting talking to our intern after lunch. You know, one of the things that we talked about is, should we require a journalism class before becoming a social media intern? And, you know, initially we thought, well, yeah, if that journalism class teaches some of those skills so that the internship doesn't have to.
Right.
But then in talking to our intern this afternoon, I don't know that she would have taken the internship, and she's doing a phenomenal job, if she wanted to do journalism, or if she had to do journalism. You know, she said today, Brent, she goes, well, I want to be an architectural engineer. You know, she doesn't, I mean, she may use social media in her career if she starts her own company or something like that. But, you know, I think, Brent, to your point, I think that they're conditioned a certain way for what that journalism class looks like. And yeah, that journalism class is still not the same as your standard test, but it still is some sort of transition to, this is not what it looks like anymore. Taylor did a good job of showing a couple examples of Nebraska calls their social media hub the corn crib, I think he said today. He showed at TCU, they just started a brand new social media area that their former AD had tweeted out. And so, yeah, just giving those kids those examples, like, this is what you're going to have to do. You know, we bring in, actually, I'll have to say the local newspaper, the Non-Pareil, does a pretty good job of bridging that gap of what you share on social media versus what you put, you know, in a newspaper. So it was just a really good discussion and a really good look at kids and what that change is, what we need to change to get them to that point.
Right.
I mean, the fact is we're in a different time. And what's kind of fascinating to me is, you know, you guys, like, even just since we started podcasting together, or since we met each other in the last decade, how much has changed and how much has evolved and what the future looks like. I mean, that's all. I think sometimes we can be so narrow-minded with, like, today. Like, let's look ahead and let's look forward into, you know, what could this look like, and start trying to dream big for kids, because, you know, you hear it all the time about the stats of different things, and that, you know, the jobs of these kids' graduation years aren't going to be, you know, they're not even dreamt up yet, and just some of that stuff. So that's where, for me, I want to blow it up. Like, we need to change some things for the better for kids. And I know when I was on the EDU with Nedge, with Craig and Tim, you know, I think Tim kind of point blank asked me that a little bit at one point, or I've heard him ask it in other podcasts. You know, what would that look like? What would you do? And I'm not exactly sure I have that answer mapped out yet, but, like, I just know that I want better for kids.
Right.
Well, and I think systemically that's going to be really hard. We know that. We've talked about that a million times. But where you have those opportunities, it's like the class we were in today, and there are a couple of reasons why that class and classes like that in particular can be places for that kind of change. One, it's an elective and nobody really cares what happens in that class. If we're being completely honest, they're not being tied to any sort of standardized test. There typically aren't district assessments or things that go around that. So if you want to do things differently, at least for 70 minutes a day or whatever your class period is, those are prime places to try and do that, because there isn't the kind of pressure that there is in the language arts classroom down the hallway, for instance. So I've always said, gosh, that was one of the reasons I loved teaching that, is because I knew that I could try things, and I could give things a shot. In one trimester I could try it one way, and I could tweak things the next trimester, or I was on semesters at the time when I was teaching. But I could do that, and again, partly it was because it was not high priority, right?
Right.
And so if I want to really make change like that, boy, that's a nice, easy place to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Easy is probably.
When I was in Independence as tech director, I worked with the high school people, and I forget exactly the title of the class, but it was essentially around kind of social media in general kind of thing. And I had a lot of fun collaborating with those high school teachers at our 3 different high schools to kind of blow up their curriculum. And we just literally almost started from scratch and went after some ideas and tried things. And I was constantly in collaboration with those folks with some of their successes, some of their failures. But I can vividly remember those teachers being very concerned about taking the conversation there with kids. Mm-hmm. But then I think what we were finding was that the kids weren't necessarily as knowledgeable, I think, as people thought, or they weren't going to necessarily go down this path of negativity and inappropriate behavior, online. Like it wasn't as bad, I think, as they thought. And I think it's kind of like the pre-service teacher. We tend to think the pre-service teacher knows technology just because they're younger, and that's not true. And you aren't changing the way they go through pre-service teacher prep programs. So they're not all of them, and I'm not speaking generally, but the majority of them are still doing the same exact things. Like if you listen to Hunter, and I'm going to butcher his last name, it's like Rodden Slavin, or he was
Rodden Slavin. Thank you.
He's at Lincoln now as a freshman, comes from Waverly, Nebraska. Like, I mean, what a brilliant kid. And he said, in essence, on the thing, it's the same thing. I got 2 5-page papers due, Monday, and I'll be working on them this weekend, kind of thing. It's like, I just sit there shaking my head thinking, man, like nothing's changed, and it's just going to be that way, I guess. So.
Yeah, he had a great interview with Edgy EDU also, and I did just retweet, found Edgy EDU's Twitter account and retweeted the link to when Brent was on there a week or 2 ago. So be sure to check that out. So fabulous day. Thanks again to Taylor for stopping by, and Devin for coming over. My dad moment of the week, and then we'll bring Kristin Ziemke on. So my wife was in charge of the school giving tree, and took the kids to a local retirement home today to kind of hand out some stuff, kind of one that we've partnered with for a long while. And so the other kids got to come too. And my 7-year-old, they all kind of helped, them do a crossword puzzle and a couple different things. And as we were leaving, my 7-year-old tells my wife, old people are fun. And that her taking that away, I thought was just hilarious. And it was good to have my wife, kind of leading that charge and doing some of those things. So, yeah, old people are fun, according to my 7-year-old. But anyway, Kat,
yeah,
what do you got?
I got a couple things thrown in my head, but I'll narrow down to one. So my wife and I have kind of started helping out a family somewhat through our church, and it's a fella has 2 little ones, a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. So we're now watching them as well, and they're adorable little girls, and we're just kind of loving on them. But what has been so cool for me to see is my kids' reaction to them being here. And initially, some of the attention, particularly of my youngest, who's 2.5-ish, has slipped from him to these girls at times for mom and I. And he struggled initially a little bit, but my 4-year-old Ollie, I've just been so incredibly impressed with this kid and the way that he's handled. And he gives them, as we call them, smooches, and it's super cool to see how he's reacting to us helping this family out, and just wanting to help these girls and play with them. And I don't know, it just warms my heart, man, to see him acting like that toward these little girls.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'll do a quick one. We had my youngest Claire, who co-hosted with us last time. She was recently tried out for a play. Their middle school play, I think, is some sort of adaptation of Robin Hood. And she was all excited that when she get the part of Debbie Downer. So if you know, those of you, Brent and Josh know Claire, that couldn't be more kind of anti her personality. The kid is always kind of jumping all over the place and smiling and laughing and being crazy. So she's pretty excited to have 4 or 5 or 6 lines or something in this play. So we're looking forward to the end of February, seeing Claire as Debbie Downer in some sort of middle school adaptation of Robin Hood, which should be pretty awesome.
That will be interesting, to say the least. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, our guest has arrived, so it's time to up the IQ of the show exponentially, as always. We are pleased tonight to be joined by Kristin Ziemke. Kristin just kind of does everything. Author, teacher, apparently doesn't sleep because she's writing all the time. Chicago's awesome. It's beautiful. I live in this awesome place. I have great food. Kristin, it is so great to have you on the show.
Hey, you guys. Thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here hanging out with you.
We try to have a good time. So do a little bit better job in an introduction.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a really good introduction. I'm a very passionate fan of Chicago, and I feel like I have to be the ambassador and represent it in the best light at all times. So I'm always trying to celebrate the many good things that are happening in the city. Teaching, working with teachers around the country, doing a little bit of writing here and there, and as you said, trying to get some sleep too. So trying to figure out what that perfect balance is. I haven't nailed that yet.
Guys, I just realized, we are very pro Chicago. This is our second Chicagoan guest in a row.
Oh, that's right. We had Jenny on previously. That's correct.
Yeah.
That's good. That's a good trend. I can hook you up with some other good Chicagoans
for
your next conversation.
We'll just start an all Chicago season.
That's right. I mean, leading up to ISTE, that would be appropriate.
That is true. We did get some ISTE tips from Jenny. So, maybe it's like those like NCIS or Chicago Fires. We can be Chicago dads.
That's
and
awesome.
Be picked up by CBS.
There you go. It's a new show. It's like real reality TV.
That's right. Man, I'm glad you're here tonight, Kristin.
Yeah.
So you have had the opportunity to, as you said, you get to travel and work with a lot of different educators, both in Chicago and really around the world. What is it that you really enjoy sharing with them? What is, what's your favorite message to share out, and where does that come from?
Yeah, I think I say all the time that I get to do the best work because I get to spend most of my time with kids and then a little bit of time learning with adults. And as you guys know, anytime you walk into a school, you learn something, whether it be good, bad, or whatever. There's that constant input of what's happening around you in environment, learning methods, and kids and teaching styles. So I think what I find the most joy in is showcasing this moment of thinking with kids. It's not about learning how to use a tool of technology. It's not about doing something that's shiny and fancy, but it's really about optimizing thinking for all kids and looking at how we can diversify and differentiate that maybe today in the digital age, but critically getting back to the ability to ask questions, to infer, to summarize and synthesize, and then to make connections across the learning day. So I would say like my favorite thing to do in schools is to spend time doing some demo lessons in classrooms and co-teaching with a classroom teacher, where maybe other teachers come in for an observation and get to sit around the perimeter of the classroom and sort of watch kid thinking in action, and then do some, maybe after the lesson interviews with kids and be like, well, what was important about that? What did you learn? What do you wonder? What do you want to research or explore next? I think that's the best way to spend time in the classroom.
That's awesome. Kristin, it's great to see you, my friend.
Yeah, great to be here. I know, my Midwest friends. Yay.
Awesome. So, hey, tell us what you consider kind of best practice in literacy. I know you have a lot of passion around that. Your book, Amplify, is fantastic, and you're welcome to elaborate on that as well. But what's best practice in literacy look like?
Yeah, I think like that's originally where I find my home as a teacher, is in this literacy practice piece, and then expanding from literacy into inquiry. And tech was actually something I went kicking and screaming into. And my amazing tech coach, Carolyn Skiba, gave me the nudge in to see like how this could impact literacy and inquiry. And so when I think about literacy, for me, it looks like kids reading authentic texts across the day, in every subject, right? Like we all really have to be literacy teachers. And one of the things I've been looking at with digital literacy is some of Anne Magnan's new work, in that she's done a lot of research on digital literacy. And she's now pared it down to, it's not just reading on screen versus reading in print, but that the reading on screen varies by format. So is it a website? Is it a PDF? Is it social media? All different types of reading. And then it also depends on the platform. So reading on a Chromebook is different than reading on an iPad, is different than reading on an iPhone. And so her advocacy is that, like, we've said for many, many years that we're all reading teachers, but now more than ever, as mobile devices push into the educational setting, we all really, truly need to be reading teachers, because there's so many new intricacies and complexities to go about that. And so when I think about best practice in literacy, it looks like a lot of authentic text. Sometimes kids are in text at their level. I would say most times kids are in text that they want to read. And what the research shows is that when kids are motivated and engaged with a piece of text, that they can actually surpass their level and tackle titles and decode ideas more complex than what they might be able to do in a specific grade level text. And so whether it be looking at articles, looking at books, working with small groups, I think that's all of those best practice pieces. A lot of it goes back to David Pearson and Richard Allington's work on both active literacy. How do we add more multimodal thinking to the reading workshop? And then how do we really bring in these principles of volume? The more you read, the better reader you become. Choice, motivation increases, and the opportunity to respond for real. And so I hope when I'm spending time in classrooms, I get to see teachers that are reading aloud to kids every day. I get to see kids that have independent reading every single day. I get to see kids that have library checkout every single day. And if we can build some of these habits and routines for what it means to be a reader, then we can expand that to media and have kids analyzing and comprehending images and art, have them doing the same type of deep comprehension and close reading practices with video, and then building up to this place where, regardless of the medium that we might be working in, what we're doing is thinking across the day.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit more about that, I think. So one of the things I really appreciate about your work is the practicality that you offer to classroom practice, right? So it's not something, much of what you offer we could do the next day in classrooms with teachers that I know that I work with and that Josh works with. But for whatever reason, and you talked about kind of going kicking and screaming into this, the use of technology more and more. for whatever reason, that really scares people, right? So when we start talking about utilizing different kinds of media and analyzing different kinds of media, what are some practical things that teachers who are now sitting in classrooms with, they might have 22 third graders, and each of them has an iPad or a Chromebook or something like that. What is it that they can practically do that won't, scare the, holy crap out of them, to use those devices in really purposeful ways?
Yeah. And I think, to start that, like, I'm a big fan of less is more, and I think it's those little, we call them habits for living, in a tech classroom that you do every Monday or every Tuesday or every single day, day in, day out. And that's where we look for students to lead the learning, in that when kids are comfortable with the format of what you're asking them to do, and when they do it on repeated occasions, then they understand how to use the technology, and we can see their thinking cycle in depth and breadth over time. And then we have good metrics to assess upon, right? So I think, like, looking at some of those simple practices of using video every single day to do some type of reflection, right? It's not about necessarily an exit slip or like kids doing selfie videos. It's reflection, right? Like, it's metacognition. And we use that language with kids because we're elevating the conversation in all that we do. My first grade students always knew what it meant to reflect. And so we talk about that when you talk about your thinking. And I think I'm a huge fan of exactly what we're doing here, talking heads on video, thinking about something that happened in class. I could put my math manipulatives here and sort those out for you. I could talk with a partner and have a debate. I could talk about my favorite right now book. And so I think, like, any teacher could start and go from right now to the end of the school year with video and be doing some really great practices. I think we as educators have for a long time had technology in our rooms and been like, we know we have to do something, but we don't know what to do. And so we've like freaked out a little bit about it, or I'm guilty of that too. Like, I totally listened to the webinars on like 60 apps in 60 minutes. Or like, once I found a great drawing tool, I was like, well, what's the next best drawing tool? And I now realize, like, I already have a drawing tool. Like, don't sweat it, like, when that goes away, you can find a new one. So it's not about like really stressing about some of those big pieces, but looking many times with the educational outcome leading the charge, right? What do I want kids to do? I want them to summarize and synthesize this book. What do I want kids to do? I want them to infer and closely read a piece of art, and then have some turn and talk discourse with a partner, because we still want to keep that face-to-face relationship piece in there. So I always suggest to educators and coaches, like, find one thing and try one new thing every quarter of the school year. Like, that's a very doable goal that we can all live up to. I think oftentimes as educators, we're hardest on ourselves. And so we overcommit and then like fall off the wagon and end up crying on, the reading rug. Like, I did too much. Like, I don't know what to do anymore right now. But one thing a quarter, like, you can do it. Like, that's one thing every 10 weeks. And chances are you're going to have a colleague that talks to you in the lunchroom or at the copier is like, oh, I discovered this other thing. And so it might even be more than one thing. But by the end of the year, you've got 4 quality practices that you're doing with kids. By the end of 2 years, you've got 8 awesome things. And then you start getting in this cycle of lather, rinse, repeat, right? Like, what are we doing? We're documenting our new learning in video. We're asking questions and doing research online and in traditional tools. And then I think once we get a couple of those good practices together, our next push is to really start analyzing digital student work with agency. We've done it with paperwork. We've spent years making portfolios and looking at writing samples and comparing them across the grades to make sure, that they're rigorous enough. But we haven't done the same thing with our digital work products. And I think a lot of times when kids make something on a device, we're like, or like, that's awesome, instead of pushing the conversation a little further and being like, well, that's really smart. Here's what I can see evidence of. And I hope in our grade level meetings and in our staff meetings, we're talking more about what do we see in terms of digital evidence in kids' work.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about your happy places and
Yeah.
things that you're great at. We're going to get you a little fired up right now. Let's talk
Okay.
about net neutrality a little bit.
Oh my goodness, that is
So
like
this week,
checking my pulse right now, because I'm like, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to sleep about it. You know, it's like,
so
net neutrality.
Just for some context, 2015, Obama put in, I think, regulations that essentially assured a free and open, an open internet that, you're not piecemealing different things together. Rolling back these net neutrality guidelines, rules, which is being voted on this week by our government, could, in very likely scenarios, mean that you pay one thing to access pictures, and you pay something completely different to access video, and something different to see emails, and it becomes not a much less regulated and kind of a wild, wild west of the internet as we know it. You have been, especially on my social media feeds, one of the leaders from an education point of view. And let's be clear, there's been thousands and thousands of people who are against this. They tend to not be in high-ranking public offices, unfortunately. But as a grassroots effort, you have been one that has written positions and been in NPR and a variety of things. So give us kind of your perspective, and where is your passion for this coming from, and really kind of the impact that you see on schools, because I think that's a lot of what you've been writing and sharing about.
Yeah, and I think I think you said exactly right. Like, yes, we all know we have to pay an internet fee to use the internet, but once you pay that one fee, you get everything. Like, you can stream, you can upload, you can connect. I think the easiest way to explain it is something that my friend Chris Lehman framed up for education. Was, you think about it like cable, right? Basic cable, and that it could look like if we face deregulation. But then to access Instagram is another fee, to potentially be another fee. And so it becomes an environment of pay to play, right? And so then we look at tax kids, and it's not just to play, it's pay to learn. Right. So we've talked for the last 2 decades about the digital divide, and we are so close at a moment in time where that is something that we are chopping away at. Common Sense just shared a study 2 weeks ago that said, of a child 8 years old or younger, 98% of American homes have access to a mobile device and the internet, up from 54% in 2011. So when we look at like the rate of this, we know that like we're chopping away on that digital divide piece. However, when we think about deregulation at this point in time, for me, it's an equity issue, because those who can afford to pay for a graduated internet rate will. Those who can't absolutely won't have access. And so when we think about kids doing research for school, when we think about kids publishing content online, when we think about Jenkins' work on participatory culture, digital media has completely provided a platform for marginalized communities in the last decade and a half. And so when we think about this piece of participation, and that anyone with a device has a voice and can share their message, that could all go away with deregulation. I see the large impact with schools in that now every school needs to be online. all day long, right? Like even in my wonderful Chicago school, we still have issues with speed and loading things. And if you try to watch a video at 1:15 in the afternoon, you're going to get the spinning beach ball, right? But like, what does that look like if we start implementing internet service providers that can load their content faster, that have priority over others, that can actually block or slow down sites from being loaded? How does that impact the information that we have access to? And then how does our access to information inform our values and our thoughts and our civic engagement? I'm thinking too about our school uses Chromebook, a mix of Chromebooks and iPads. And for schools that are working off a cloud-based platform, if there is an increased cost, then that's an increased cost for every student and every device. And how can we scale some of those things? So it's something where it will limit the content that we can access as teachers, the places we can send our kids, the opportunities for innovation. So much great collaboration happens in online settings right now, like this. Like, we're not physically together, but we're having a fabulous conversation on your podcast. What will that look like if we're no longer able to do that? So it's something that's very concerning. It is set to go to vote with the FCC tomorrow at 10:30 Eastern time. And we should expect to have information in the afternoon. Aside from all the issues in education, I think it's a huge conflict of interest because the chairman of the FCC used to be the chief legal for Verizon, and internet service providers like Verizon stand to benefit the most. And so it's really hard for me to understand how we can have people who share the same space now advocating for something that will make a former employer a whole lot of money.
Yeah, and Kristin, I think the thing that bothers me maybe the most, so the impact, the potential impact on schools and kids is obvious. The larger impact just socially really bothers me. You know, I mean, this idea that access to information, we already know what role information plays in how people end up voting and how people end up engaging in their communities. And for this to even be on the table really kind of bothers me at a much more social level than I think it even does at an educational level.
Yep. And I would 100% agree with you on that. I think that like my advocacy is from the educator space because I didn't hear a lot of people maybe speaking about that. But this is the future of democracy. Like really, that's what we're talking about. And in an era where for the last 2 years, all we've talked about is where did you get that from, and sourcing and fake news and identifying your resources. Never has it been more important to have access to multiple streams of information and the ability to vet them for ourselves, right? This is about companies vetting your information streams for you and allowing you access to information. Things other small businesses as well, or small startups like a Twitter, like a Snapchat, like a Instagram would have never gotten a foothold if larger companies were holding them down, like what might occur if we go forward with this new piece. So I think you're absolutely right. The message that keeps playing over and over in my mind with a group that I'm a part of, an emerging leaders cohort for the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. We've had access to a number of people and talked about some of these things in the past year. And one of the people we got to speak with was Marty Barron, who is the editor-in-chief of the Washington Post. And their tagline as a newspaper is "Democracy dies in darkness." And that's all I can think about as we talk about net neutrality, and it's why I'm up at night.
Hey, Kristin, speaking of Instagram, first of all, I want to say I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to this podcast like 10 times because you're brilliant, and I just appreciate the conversation. And I know that I'm blessed to follow you online and have had a chance to meet you in person and like learn from you all the time. But one of the things I love about you as well is just your vigor for life. And on Instagram, you have like a slow-mo video of you doing a belly flop. absolutely classic. And I just had to say that. It was like, it's like my favorite post.
Belly flaps are sort of my thing. I don't know how that got started. I think it was like a double dog dare. And yeah, I had some bruises after a couple of those belly flops. So I think that definitely speaks to the like embrace the good and the bad of life. Like I try to be authentic on Instagram and be like, here's things that are fun. And also here's me like kicking the chart paper across my office in order to get to my desk because it's one of those weeks. So I think it's fun playing around with this visual media of storytelling, and Instagram is a great tool for that. I also think it's a great tool for classrooms because it's a way to publish very easily. You can have kids guest posts. There's not a limit on the amount that you can write. And so again, when we think about how do we give kids a voice, how do we signal that the learning we do here matters, Instagram's a great tool. But I would not recommend belly flaps for kids under the age of 8.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Go ahead, Josh.
I was gonna say, let's be honest. I wouldn't recommend it for people over like 30. Either.
Yeah, maybe it should only be like people under 8. Like I don't know. Like maybe our metrics on that are off.
When I've seen those posts, I like my stomach hurts, and I'm usually sitting on my couch with a bowl of Cheetos or something.
I know. I've like in my old age now have started to rethink like maybe I'm beyond the belly flap right now. So.
Go ahead, Kat. Sorry to cut you off.
No. I was just going to ask around, you have a great presence online, and how has that helped you as an educator? I mean, my doctorate, my dissertation is going to be on how educators use Twitter as a PLN. And I know I've personally benefited from it. And I spent a lot of time trying to influence teachers to get themselves online, get connected. Like, how's that played for you in your journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been so significant and impactful. I was thinking about it. I was just driving home from a PD right before I got online with you guys. And I was like thinking in my head, I was like, how do I even know them anyway? Like, how did we all first start meeting? And it was because of social media and the ability to share ideas online quickly, to connect with other smart people that you're like, oh, I bet they have smart friends too. And then it just becomes this amazing place where people share ideas. Early on, I got connected with the First Chat group, a group of first grade educators who met every Sunday night across the course of the school year. And I benefited from that group so much. I met amazing colleagues from all over the world. I met 3 that ended up becoming like my best friends in real life that I learned from online and in person. And then I think it's just a great way, again, for us as educators to be reflective about what we're doing. Like every tweet that we post, every piece that we share is a good piece for us to go back and be like, did that matter? How do I know? What evidence do I have, right? Why? And then what could I do to revise it again? So I feel like for an education space, and I know that there's a lot of negative voices around Twitter in the past maybe year or two, but I think that in an education space, it's the most collaborative network that we have, that people are very generous in sharing. And anytime you have a question or an idea, you can post it and pretty much with certainty be guaranteed that someone who is informed about that topic will be able to respond and get back to you on that. And so it's so helpful. So many of my friends that I run into now at conferences are my Twitter friends and people that I know from around the world. So it's been a huge help for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've had that conversation about Twitter's place in the world now, and I think you're right. I think we still all find a whole lot of value in it.
Right.
But I think it is a lot different than, like you said, when I started in 2008 or whatever year it was. So
yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
so
and sorry, just to piggyback on that, I completely encourage educators to get on it because I think it's still the best space that we have to do our work. And I don't understand why like we can't have an educator takeover. Like if the rest of the world is like down on Twitter, then we're just going to keep leveraging it as teachers and thinkers and make it into the space that we want it to be. Like nothing's ever final. We can redesign it.
kind of like old warehouse buildings. We're just redesigning the warehouse and bringing the new people in.
That's right. You can do whatever you want.
Well, Kristin, we always end our show with a segment we call Sharing is Caring, because we're Care Bear fans. So we're going to give you a couple minutes to kind of think about something you want to share. It can be a person to follow. It can be a book that you've been reading, blog post, whatever.
Okay.
I am going to start because I don't think we, to kind of come full circle with the water cooler that we talked about, I don't think we've ever really shared Taylor Siebert's Twitter handle. Taylor, like we mentioned before, founder of Strive, a Nebraska guy. So, he runs the Strive company from Henderson, Nebraska, population 900 people. And he's got 50 or 60 schools in Nebraska that he is doing all their live broadcasting and, more importantly, turning that over to kids and working with kids. And, now the class intercom has kind of branched him into Lincoln a little bit, which it's fun to see him. Him and I have had numerous conversations. He was a early supporter of Ed Camp. So we've had conversations for a long time just about, what that entrepreneurship looks like. He said, I never wanted investors. I always wanted to do it from the ground up, and he's done it. He's just a phenomenal success story. He's become a great friend. And again, a fabulous conversation. So I will here in just a second put that out on the Dads on Ed hashtag. Give Taylor Siebert a follow. So,
Awesome.
Khaled?
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna go with the book. Believe it or not, it's called The Outward Mindset. I'm showing it on the screen here for those live watchers. Seeing Beyond Ourselves: How to Change Lives and Transform Organizations by the Arbinger Institute, or Arbinger. I'm not exactly sure how that's pronounced. But you guys, know me well enough. I've always tried to have a growth mindset, kind of failing forward sort of thing. This book kind of blew my mind. Assistant superintendent I worked with here in Kansas City, I had took over the Chip Gaines book, Capital Gains, to him. And I came back home with 3 books. And this was one of them. And I dug in, and I just was like really taken back by this, because it speaks to my heart about, like, essentially having empathy for others first and thinking of other people before yourself. And if cultures, and, I immediately go to schools. It's just my nature, / my home. And so if I'm putting my wife in front of me and my desires and needs, that's a good thing. Same can be true of a classroom, or if I'm a principal or whatever. And so I think it's a fantastic read. There were a couple Kansas City police references in here that kind of struck me as well, just because I've been getting myself connected to folks here that are doing some great things in the city. And so that made me proud to see some of the things that were going on in there as well, and some of the differences that those organizations are now having because of having an outward mindset. So it's worth a read.
Awesome. Devin?
Yeah, I'm going to share something that's a little more personal, something we did in our district. One of the things I've been trying to help, we have some new instructional technology coaches. Actually, Kristin was nice enough to chat with them one day for a few minutes. But one of the things I've been trying to get them, help them do is to be able to tell the story of the great work that they're doing with kids and with teachers. And that skill is not always easy. And in a world that we live in, where even in our district, we're being asked for, data around the effectiveness of having, these coaches in buildings. I want to make sure that we're doing a good job of telling our story and sharing some of those things. So we spent some time engaging in a little bit of storytelling recently, where I had them kind of think about a very impactful experience that they had with kids and teachers that wouldn't have happened had they not been in their positions, in their roles. And as I took all those, I tried to put them together in a digital magazine that I just created in Lucid Press. But I'm going to share it out just so that they, if people haven't seen it, they can see some of the work that those folks are doing, because I think they're doing really great work. And sometimes that gets lost in what's happening in school districts, mainly because it's not data points. We don't have numbers that are saying what great work these people are doing. And I want that to be shared. So I'm going to share the link to the little Lucid Press magazine, digital magazine that we created to share some of the really great work that they're doing.
Yeah, having already seen that when Devin tweeted out last week or the week before is some great examples. And like you said, sometimes the best things that we can share can't be measured with a data point. So, all right, Kristin, we've given you a couple of minutes to stall. What do you got?
Yeah. So can I do 2 things?
You know what? The first rule of Dads and Ed is we have no rules. So
all right, that's good. Is it like Fight Club?
We can't tell you that.
I know, can't talk about it. Okay, so just thinking about colleagues that really are inspiring me these days, I would like to give a shout out to 2 of my colleagues, not in my building, but my global PLN of colleagues. One would be Chad Everett from Mississippi. Chad has had a number of different jobs in life, but different roles in education, from being a district tech coach to being a district expulsion officer, and has now found his place back in the middle school ELA classroom and is doing some great work on empathy, social justice, literacy. And I just totally think he's someone that needs to be followed. He's always a good barometer for me on where my ideas are, and really guides me to think about what's next in the conversation, whether it be race, whether it be equity, whether it be what we are or aren't doing with literacy, whether we are or aren't doing what's right for kids. So total shout out to him as someone that you should follow. My other colleague that keeps me on point all the time is Catherine Hale out of the Virginia area. She is an Apple Distinguished Educator as well, and she works in middle school, again, middle school tech coach, but also has found herself back in the ELA classroom. So 2 people that are ones to watch and ones to listen to, because they're some big thinkers and deep idea sharers. So please check them out. Thinking about books, it's funny, Devin, that you talk a little bit about this story piece, because I wanted to recommend my favorite book of the year is this one from Dan Yacarino, I Am a Story. And it talks about the evolution of literacy from writing on the walls of caves to mobile devices. And what we really do as humans is tell stories. And this is a lot of what I'm writing about right now, but in the picture book version. So perfect for, I would say, K through 8 for sure, because everyone can relate to this piece. The other book that I wanted to recommend is this one, Most People, talking about the good in humanity in a day and age where media sometimes dominates mindsets. This book is a picture book that reassures kids, you know, no matter what you hear in the media, most people are kind and loving. Most people like dogs too. Most people will read a book with you. So just a great one to have on your shelf whenever you need it.
Those are fabulous. And just in time for Christmas.
Just in time.
I've made a note already.
That's right.
I have someone who may really like either one of those.
Just watching.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we have come to the end of the evening. Kristin, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to.
Oh my gosh, guys! Thanks so much for having me. It's always fun to see you, whether it be real life or virtually. So thanks so much.
Real life this summer.
Yes.
Chicago.
And where? I know. I'm gonna have just like a Kristin's friend party or something. I don't even know what to do. I'm so excited. Everybody's coming.
You need to start like the Kristin Ziemke Chicago tours.
I know. I think I'm going to do that.
Get a bus. Just drive around.
It might be a thing. It'll be like Vince Vaughn on The Breakup. I could have one of those boats and be like, to your left, right?
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, we are off for Christmas. We will see you all after the new year. Kristin, thanks again. And we hope everyone enjoyed the show.
Bye, everybody. Happy holidays.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody.